We've titled this Easter series, The Week, and our plan is to simply follow the footsteps of Jesus through the final week of his life, 7 sunrises, about 168 hours. You know that only 2 of the Gospels, Matthew and Luke, they spend a few chapters on the birth and the childhood of Jesus. There are limited accounts of Jesus' first 2 years of ministry. These are stories like his baptism, choosing of the disciples, some of his early teaching, miracles, and healings. Then all of the Gospels, they dedicate much space to Jesus' final year, particularly his journey from Galilee to Jerusalem. However, it's important to note that nearly 1/3 of the entire Gospel writings focus on the week, the final week of Christ's life. So clearly, these are very significant days. So here's where we're headed together. Today, I'm going to look at Monday. Jesus walks into a temple courtyard, and that day he sees something that angers him. Next week, we will look at Tuesday, and it's filled with what I would say provoking and teaching. On Tuesday, Jesus provokes the religious leaders, and he lays his claim as Messiah. He also spends much of that day teaching. His last sermon is recorded on that day, and many of his most powerful parables are told that day. Wednesday of that week is often referred to as Silent Wednesday, because many believe there is nothing recorded of Jesus' coming and goings that day. Most people believe that Jesus spent that day in Bethany with his most intimate friends, or he retreated alone somewhere for quiet time with God. Now, on Wednesday of that week, get this will be April 9th, we're going to have 2 incredible worship gatherings that will happen simultaneously. One will be held at our Dormont campus at the new church building down there, and it will be led by the Oakland, the East End, and the Dormont worship team. At that gathering on April 9th, Doug will give a brief devotion about Silent Wednesday. And then at our Wexford location, the Wexford worship teams, along with the Worship Cafe and Sewickley Valley, they will gather, and I will give a brief devotion that night on Silent Wednesday. Then the following week, we're going to look at Thursday, and Jesus gathers with his closest friends, and much of this is familiar to the Last Supper. Late into that night, him and his disciples, they journey into the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prays and he agonizes over the fate that will await him. And then Thursday, it ends with a kiss and a betrayal and an arrest. And then on Friday, Good Friday, at all of our campuses, we will turn our attention to the cross and the crucifixion of Jesus. And then finally, at all of our campuses, we're going to begin our Easter services experiencing Saturday. Jesus is in the tomb, and all hope is lost. And we're going to be asking you to arrive early that day, because we're going to start the services across all of our campuses with a production moment that we're going to be able to experience the final sunrise of the week together as Saturday becomes Sunday morning and a stone is forcefully dislodged from a tomb that could not hold our God. I hope that you journey with us as we travel this week together. And by the way, if you're looking for a good read, maybe to track along with us during this sermon series, the teaching teams put together a great book recommendation for you. It's called The Final Week of Jesus, and I put it in your outline if you want to maybe pick that up. So leading up to this week, the Gospels record of Jesus' journey to Jerusalem. And along the way, he's been speaking to his disciples about what's going to happen to him when he gets to Jerusalem. In the Gospel of Mark, it accounts 3 different times, 3 predictions or warnings that Jesus gives to his disciples about what's going to happen. Mark 8:31 says this, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And if you know this text, this is the one where Peter pulls Jesus aside and says, no, that's not possibly the way it's going to go down. And then these sort of famous words, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." And then short time later, Mark chapter 9, verse 30, they went on from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples and saying to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, And when he is killed after 3 days, he will rise. But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask him. And then finally, a third time, literally Jerusalem is right on the top of the hill. They are almost at the city. It says, and they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them, and they were amazed. And those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was going to happen to him, saying, see, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles, and they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And after 3 days, he's talking about himself, he will rise. Now, I took the time to show you that because I want you to know something as we look at this week in the life of Christ, the final week. None of this caught him by surprise. So please remember, this was all part of God's plan of redemption throughout all of time. Since Adam and Eve in the garden, this has been all part of God's rescuing plan. It's now set in motion. These days are significant, and they have been prophesied for centuries. None of what happens to Jesus this week leaves him saying, whoa, man, I didn't see that coming. None of it. This slide that I'll throw up here, this is just a short sampling of the instances that were foretold during this week. There's many more. These were foretold 500, 700 years before this week. We're going to be looking at some of them as we go through this series. None of this week caught God off guard. This was part of the plan of how he would reconcile himself to us. And as difficult as some of this series will be, it all happened because God never stopped pursuing us. And he'll never stop pursuing you. So now let's turn to Monday. And before I do that, I just want to touch briefly on the day before, on what happened on Sunday, particularly at the end of Sunday, in the evening. Jesus arrives that day in Bethany, and he summons his disciples to get a colt. And on what is now referred as Palm Sunday, the week before Easter Sunday, he makes his triumphal entrance into Jerusalem. If you've been around church, you're familiar with Palm Sunday, and the crowds loved it. Jerusalem, which would have normally held about 600,000 residents at this time, now has as many as 2 to 2.5 million people there for the Passover festival. And the people shouted, Hosanna, save us, as Jesus made his way through Jerusalem. And just an oh, by the way moment here, it says in Zechariah 9:9, 500 years before Palm Sunday happened, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Again, that was part of God's plan. He was in control. He's not surprised by the events of this week. And Mark, the gospel writer Mark, he records something very interesting in his account that happened that Sunday evening. After the parade was over into Jerusalem, Mark 11:11 says this, and he, Jesus, entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. Jesus looks around at everything that's going on in the temple there Sunday night, and it's getting late, and he goes back to Bethany with his disciples. Bethany is less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. It's most likely where Jesus stayed this week. And as Jesus goes to sleep that Sunday night with the week right ahead of him, there are money changers in that temple looking forward to another profitable day. Jesus' disciples are nervous. Pilate, he's brought a small Roman army with him to Jerusalem just to put down any uprisings that may happen this week. Judas, he's birthing a plot. The Pharisees are fueling a conspiracy. The upper room is available. There are 6-inch spikes and a cross that await. A tomb is vacant, and 2+ million people have gathered. And the sun comes up on Monday morning, and the week begins, and Jesus knows where he's headed. Based on what he saw the previous night at the temple, he's going to pick a fight. What did he see at the temple that night that caused him to want to go pick a fight there on Monday? Here's what you got to know about this. 2+ million people in Jerusalem for the Passover would have been required to do two things there that week. One is this: every year a Jewish man 20 years or older paid a voluntary half-shekel temple tax to the Jerusalem temple. This was a tax that was instituted all the way back to the time of Moses. It was paid in silver, and specifically in the form of a Tyrian shekel. Stay with me here. The religious establishment declared that the Tyrian shekels were the only legal currency that would be acceptable in the temple. So if you did not have that form of currency, and if you did not make arrangements prior to getting there, then you had to go and exchange whatever currency you had for a Tyrian shekel at one of the money changers' tables. This would be very similar, that if you were to travel abroad, go out of the country where they not take the American dollar, and you'd have to find a place that would exchange the American dollar for the currency in that country, right? But what was happening was anything but fair. The money changers were ripping the people off. They were charging ridiculous exchange rates. A tax that should have totaled about 3 days' wages was sometimes costing twice that. Millions of people attempting to do what was required of them by God were being taken advantage of. The second thing that you'd have to do is you would bring a dove to be sacrificed as an atonement for your sin. It's a symbol to be in right relationship with God. However, the temple officials would often deem that the sacrifice of their dove was not perfect, because see, it had to be without blemish. And therefore, they would say, well, your dove's unacceptable, but for the right price, you can buy one of these unblemished doves. See, this was a scam, what was happening in the temple courtyard. It was corrupt, and it went all the way up to the high priest. The ancient Jewish historian Josephus records this when he's referring to Ananias, the high priest of that time. He called him the great procurer of money. He was getting really rich off of what was going on in the temple courtyards. It was corrupt. People were getting used in the name of religion. And those that earnestly were seeking God were being scammed. So what happens? Monday, when Jesus walks into that temple, Mark 11:15, it says this: and they came to Jerusalem, and Jesus, he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons or doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you have made it a den of robbers. And the chief priests and the scribes heard it, and they were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowds, they were astonished at what he was teaching. Jesus got angry, and he drove out those that were preventing people from seeking God. It says that basically what he did there was he was teaching the crowd, and they were amazed at his teaching. And their religious authority on the spot began to determine how they would eliminate him. So let me ask you a question. Did Jesus lose his temper in the temple? Like, did he just flip out? Did he have a moment of temple rage? Right? Does this mean that it's okay for all of us, to blow our lid sometimes, to just sort of snap out? Because I know that from what I've read in the Bible, we're supposed to be very careful about our anger, aren't we? See, I think our own anger issues are very easy to rationalize, aren't they? Because we say things like, well, that's just the way I am. Or we say things like, well, if you wouldn't have done that because you know that makes me mad, I wouldn't have gotten mad. Or, man, every time that happens, I always lose my cool. And I hear some people say, well, that's just the way God made me. I'm just kind of a hothead. Couple thoughts. One, just to feel anger isn't necessarily a sin. And not all anger leads to the wrong results. See, I believe that there is sinful anger and there is righteous anger. Now follow me, stay with me. Feeling upset about something is not where the sin occurs. It is our response to that feeling that opens the door to sin. Best verse I could find on this, Ephesians 4:26 says this, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." See, when we're angry, I believe, depending sort of who you are, one of two things can happen based on maybe the way you're wired when you get angry. One, you spew it, right? You get angry and you just pop off. And you've got absolutely no filter, and whoever happens to be closest to you is going to bear the brunt of it. And in your anger, when you spew, you're sinning. And some of us, maybe we're not spewers. We may be what I would call a stewer. We seethe in it. We don't lose our temper, but instead, we just sit and we burn. And we take it over and over and over again in our head. And that's not healthy for you. And what I've typically found is sooner or later it's going to explode on someone, and it's typically someone that you really care for. See, when you spew or stew, the scripture says here that it gives the devil a foothold. Now, this word foothold, it's the Greek word topos. And it means literally an opportunity or a location, and it could be translated even as a room. Now, in other words, in your anger, don't give the devil a guest room in your heart. Don't let anger live unchecked and go unguarded without bringing it before God and asking Him to process why you're so angry about this and what you need to do with it. In the temple, I believe Jesus' anger was not a sinful anger. I believe it was the other that I mentioned, a righteous anger. Now, I know what some of you are going to try to do right here, right, with your anger. You're going to try to bend it or rationalize your anger outburst to always put them in the category of righteous anger, right? See, when my daughter, she doesn't clean her room like she's supposed to, it evokes a righteous anger in me. And I have the right to lay a little righteous rage on her. That is not righteous anger. And if you spew or stew, you are giving the devil a foothold or a guest room in your heart. You have the right to discipline her, to take privileges away, to ground her. If she's over 18, you have the right to ask her to leave. But you cannot explode on her in anger, because that would be sinful anger, not righteous anger. Same with losing your temper at work or in traffic or at your child's baseball game, right? That's sinful anger, not righteous. And I don't care who your boss is or how much construction there is or whether your little Johnny was safe. That's not righteous anger. See, in the temple on Monday, people were being prevented from honoring God. People were being prevented from seeking forgiveness of our sins, and we serve a God that will not stand for that. See, I do not believe that Jesus is acting like a raving lunatic in the courtyard. I believe he saw what was going on the night before when he visited, and righteous anger welled up in him. And he thought through what he needed to do, and he came back the next day, and he systematically put an end to the defiling of the temple. It says that he was actually teaching while he was going about doing this. So I don't even believe he was screaming and yelling. It says in the book of Matthew that during this episode, the children that were in the temple, that were around this situation, were cheering. That they were saying, "Hosanna to the Son of David." See, those attempting to honor God that were there when this was going down, they didn't see this as a fit of rage. Even the children realized this was a righteous act. And in Matthew, his account of it, in chapter 21:14, it reveals how the scene begins to wind down. It says this, "And the blind and the lame came to him in the midst of this, in the temple, and he healed them." See, those that were being prevented from seeking God and honoring God are now being healed by Jesus. His righteous anger, and this is so important, Righteous anger, it leads to healing. It leads to people finding God. And it leads to love. Okay, here comes a tough question. When is the last time you experienced righteous anger? I'm not talking about sympathy or empathy. Those are really good feelings. But righteous anger causes you to do something. Jesus just didn't walk into that temple and say, what's happening here is awful. You know, I really feel for these people. I have a great deal of pity. No, he learned what was happening, and then he did something about it. When is the last time that you saw suffering or an act of injustice? A situation that just stopped you in your tracks, maybe even caused your stomach to turn and your heart to break. Did you do anything about it? Because if you didn't, then you stopped at sympathy. And you know what? Hey, that's good news, because it means that at least your heart is not so hardened that you've lost all ability to care. However, when we stop at sympathy, nothing changes. Righteous anger goes beyond sympathy. It leads to learning and then to do something. You know, I will never forget my first time to Haiti. From the airport on the way to the orphanage where we've been staying, we drove in the back of a truck through the second largest city in Haiti called Cap-Haïtien. And nothing prepared me for it. I cannot describe it to you. I've got a couple photos, but they are not going to do it justice. It's simply something that you can only experience on your own. What I saw and smelled and heard affected me. There were no traffic signals, no hospitals, no banks, no businesses, trash everywhere. There was no infrastructure, no order, just absolute and complete chaos. Sewage running down the street with pigs in it. Buildings and rooms, homes without roofs, poverty and despair everywhere. You know, and I asked Brad Henderson, who was sitting beside me in the truck, and I said, is this still the devastation from the earthquake that took place in Haiti a few years ago? Because it looked like an earthquake just happened. And he said, that earthquake hit Port-au-Prince. That's miles from here. Cap-Haïtien was not affected by the earthquake at all. This is just the way it always is. And at some point on that trip, after being with the kids in the orphanage and meeting with the Haitian leaders, particularly this one pastor named John Claude, I got upset. And it was beyond sympathy or feeling sorry for them. It was this feeling of, this isn't right. And I have to do something. And I didn't start flipping tables, and I didn't come back here and start yelling and screaming at you to do something about it. Tina and I, we moved our righteous anger to learning. And from there, we decided that we had to do something about it. We began to pray over it. I still try to inform and inspire people and use whatever influence that God gives me to talk about it. And we give to the situation when we can. We are committed to going back as often as possible. I'm on the board of the PKF, which is Northway's local partner that has been doing work in Haiti for 20 years. We go to their fundraisers and we sponsor a little girl named Rosaline that we met there a couple years ago. Tina sends her gifts from time to time. Amazing technology of today. They talk on Facebook like every other day. She calls Tina mom. Tina was just there again with this last team from Northway that went, and I can't wait to go again. See, righteous anger, it fuels learning and then doing. And if you even want, right now, if something's tugging at your heart and you want to consider sponsoring a child, I put the way that you can do it in your notes through the PKF. And we are planning another trip. We plan on going there 2, 3, 4 times a year over the coming years. Has anything caused you righteous anger in this season of life you're in? Because see, I believe that righteous anger is healthy. This has been an incredibly healthy experience for Tina and I. Because it's so easy to get caught up in what's happening right in front of us and miss the outrage and the needs of this world. And you don't have to go to Haiti to find it. There are people suffering right now in your communities, in your neighborhoods, people that are being prevented from seeking God all around us. And I want to wrap up with one thought, but before I go there, I just want to say something to some of you in the room, no matter where you're worshiping today, that maybe you've experienced righteous anger in the past, and you've picked up a righteous cause, and you're going for it. Please hear this as sort of a simple and yet a gentle reminder. Don't channel your righteous anger to make others feel guilty or stupid. Don't channel your righteous anger to put yourself on some kind of a moral high ground. And don't take every single moment to jam it down others' throats. Righteous anger should lead to healing, to people finding God, and to love. So lastly, on this text is this. At the verse that I read earlier in Mark, guys, if you could put up Mark 11:15. I already read this to you. It says, and he entered the temple, so this is Jesus, and he began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. Jesus drove out the money changers and those that were selling the doves, right? But did you catch who else he drove out in that text? It says those who sold and those who bought. He also drove out some of those that were standing in line. So some of those that were getting ripped off. Why? Why did they get caught up in the righteous anger of Jesus on that Monday? And when I read that, it stopped me for a bit. And I sort of dug into it. I had to call and get Jim Platt involved because I just could not figure it out. I read some commentaries about it, and here is what I believe is going on. And I think this is going to come, hopefully, as a bit of a tough challenge for all of us here today. So follow me. Those that were there to pay the temple tax and to purchase an unblemished dove, one, they could have done this on their trip to Jerusalem, and two, cultural experts of the time say that there were stations set up all over Jerusalem to take care of this before arriving in the temple. But see, those buyers in line at those tables, they were just doing this out of convenience. See, therefore, the temple, which was supposed to be the house of prayer, a place for people to come and worship and honor, had instead just become a convenient transaction. It was meant to be a place of commitment, not of convenience. They should have taken care of this before they got to the temple. How many of us have allowed church to become a convenient transaction instead of a place of worship and honor and commitment? What does convenient church transaction look like? What does it sound like? I think it sounds like maybe some of these things. Well, hey, I try to get to church when I can. I mean, I know that I'm often 10 or 15 minutes late, but I get there in time for the message. I want my kids in church because they need God. So we get here at least once a month. I like to go to church occasionally because it always makes me feel better about myself when I leave. I try to give from time to time and maybe even help out every now and then. Hey, my kids' hockey season starts next week, so I'm going to have to miss a few months. I wish they still did those Christmas pageants. I really like those. I don't know why they can't finish in an hour. I mean, I've other things to do. I'm busy. Get my point? Those all started with I. Convenient church is when it becomes about me and not about him. 7 sunrises, 168 hours. The final week of Jesus changed the world forever. And on the first day of the week, he went to the temple to 1, pick a fight. And 2, he showed us what righteous anger is and what his Father's house was to be a place for prayer and for healing and for people to find God and for love. And third, it was never supposed to be a convenient transaction. So the sun is setting on Monday. Matthew 21, verse 17 says this, and leaving them, those that he had just got done healing, he went out of the city to Bethany, and he lodged there. That is how the first day ends of the final week of Jesus. I really want to encourage you to continue in this journey with us. Be here as we study each of these days. There is something powerful that happens in this final week of Jesus. There's something every single day that we need to know about a God that never stopped pursuing us. Will you stand up with me? I'm going to ask the campus leaders to go ahead and close out their location.